And you are live.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining. Um, I have two topics to talk about tonight. One is the update on gas and water lines in Lower Eastport, and then we'll take a little break to allow people to discuss things that are on their mind. And then I want to launch into a fairly detailed discussion of accessory dwelling units. I'll tell you, we had a meeting today at Rules Committee, which did not get completed, but I really do need your help on this. So I'm hoping you'll bear with me on what might be somewhat of a tedious, wonky presentation, but I think a very important one. So we're going to have some PowerPoint presentations, but I'll give you verbal discussion on an update on the gas and water line replacement work. It is scheduled to start on the 25th of October, although I was at a staff meeting today and I'm not going to hold my breath on that. But once it starts, it'll get cooking along. Once the gas lines are in place, that'll be followed by the city replacing water mains. And then after that, the city doing a complete streets sidewalk to sidewalk replacement. As best I can tell, there are four segments to the work, and it'll start down at First and Chesapeake, and it'll work its way up to Sixth Street. And I don't have a definitive timeline. We do need to replace the gas lines. They're metal pipes, and they're starting to get corroded and leak, and that can lead to explosions. I know a little something about that because years ago when I lived in Columbia, that was happening. People would come home, turn on the light, and kaboom. So um, it's very necessary for our safety. Um, we will be tentatively scheduling a meeting on the 6th of October to get into more details on the gas line only replacement. Um, so in general, gas line replacement means they're going to come dig a trench in the street in front of your house, start replacing the gas line. You will be temporarily out of service the day that they're doing that work, possibly 2 days, but then there will be temporary service connections and they'll go on from there. And as I say, they're starting down at First and Chesapeake Avenue. Um, there will be parking disruptions during all of this work, but and the work will go on for a while. Once it's started, after the gas line work is done, the city will come in and do the water line, and then after that, there will be the complete streets. However, I think there's a silver lining uh, on all of this because of the complete streets work. Um, that means that at least for Peninsular Eastport, we will have new sidewalks, new curbs, new street, no potholes for a while. Um, but I think there's another silver lining here, which is, and I'm pushing this with the city, and I'll be pushing it in the city budget. This is an opportunity, I believe, to underground all the overhead power and communication lines, the utility lines. This opportunity will not come back for probably 50 years. So we really need to take advantage of this opportunity. We kind of had a preview of why it's important to get the power lines down with the recent tornado. Fortunately, the city was and the utility companies were very quick in restoring us, but it isn't always going to be that way. And all we have to do is look down to Louisiana and other places to know that these utilities don't have to come back. Mark, if we can put up slide 9 now. I can walk through a couple of photographs of what I think is our. So as I said, I think that in addition to getting the complete streets, which is brand new streets and sidewalks, this underline of the utility opportunity is a very important thing to take advantage of. We get rid of all of those unsightly dangling wires and all the power lines. It's going to be much safer for any firefighting. And another thing that could come out of this is it's going to be much easier to install outlets for electronic vehicle charging. So I just want to show you 3 pictures of what this undergrounding of the lines will look like. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So basically, for this is how it's done in Crofton. There's a hole dug next to the sidewalk. For us, we will put it actually under the sidewalk or in the sidewalk. For the next slide, please, Mark. This is what the conduit would look like. And then the next slide, please, Mark. This is the machine that would lay conduit. There will be utility boxes along the way so that when they need to have access to the undergrounding lines, they can get to the lines. And another thing that may be a possibility with these utility lines is that we may be able to charge some fees for people for the use of these utility lines. We'll see how that all develops. So let's go to the next slide, please, Mark. And then we're going to open this up. First of all, to any questions about the gas and water lines and complete streets, and then any other questions before we launch into the in-depth discussion of accessory dwelling units. So at this point, we can take the PowerPoint down, and people who want to ask questions or make comments can do that by raising your hand, and we'll recognize you. Diane, you're on mute.
Okay, thanks. The complete street aspect of what you're talking about sounds pretty exciting. And I think you're right that this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to bury our overhead wires. Will BG&E pay for any of that? Or will there be any grant money from the federal government or state government under any of the new grant money that's trickling down from the government?
So the answers are yes, yes, and yes. Certainly, BG&E is going to share the cost of the complete streets when we get all of the pipeline work done, and we can pave over all of that and replace the sidewalks. The undergrounding is a fairly new topic of discussion, and that's something that when we do this coming year's budget, we need to look at how much those kinds of things would cost and how we can include that, but also getting grants and particularly getting the infrastructure monies that have been passed. It seems to me like this is the perfect thing. And again, undergrounding is the way to go. We don't have all of these power lines in people's front yards and continued disruptions of service. When I lived in Columbia, Maryland, everything was undergrounded, and it was delightful. It was certainly aesthetically quite pleasing, but it worked very well. So, yes, is that Lucinda?
Yes. Hi, my name is Ann Duca. I live over at Severn House. My question about the undergrounding is, are you going to also lay fiber optic cable and Comcast cable? Is that going to be included underground? It might be an opportunity to do that as well.
That is the idea. Get all of the utilities, whether it's power or communications, get them underground. Now, I don't think this work is going to be at Severn House right now, but I think that if we can get this inculcated into the minds of our engineers and the public works, and I'm not saying that in a derogatory way, but I'm hoping that this is going to be something that's going to be pretty straightforward. And as we go around, we're not the only place that needs new gas lines and new water lines. So as we go across the city, I just hope that it'll really be a 4-stage thing. You'll do the gas, you do the water, you'll do the undergrounding, and then you'll do the complete streets. And so as we go out through the city replacing our infrastructure, that'll just be the way things are done. But thank you for that question.
Ross, the order of questions are Robert Shoemaker, then Phyllis, then Harry Lockley. And let me check the other screen to see if anyone is there.
Okay.
No, so it's Robert,
Mr. Shoemaker.
then Phyllis, then Harry.
Okay. Mr.
Okay, thank you.
Shoemaker, if you can show us yourself.
Maybe I can. Let's see. Yeah, there we go.
There you go.
So my question is, you didn't mention anything about Horn Point Drive and Riverview Drive in your discussion so far. What's happening with those streets?
So there are 4 segments of the all the pipe replacement work. And as I said, it's starting down at First and Chesapeake, and it'll work its way up to 6th Street. So clearly, Horn Point will be in there. Riverside will also be in there. That's down at the tip of the peninsula. So that you'll be included in that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, who was next, Marianne?
Phyllis.
Phyllis.
And Phyllis, you need to unmute.
Right. Hi, Ross. I hate to be a party pooper, but aren't we a little late to the table with this pushing for the power lines, et cetera? I'm all in favor of everything you're saying, but I know for a fact that because of the death that took place over here on First and Severn, what was it, 2 years or 3 years ago? BG&E came all through the place, and they put poles in that were higher, so that they wouldn't be near the people or near the houses to be OSHA. I think that the deal was that they were out of compliance with OSHA. But anyway, and they told us at that time that they were going to bury our lines, and they didn't do it. They put in another big tall pole, and my feeling is that to have this happen in October I'd be shocked. So, I don't want to.
Well, okay, so
There's a lot of planning that has to go into it.
Yes, there is, but I don't think we're late. I think we're just in time. But remember, it starts on October 25th, if then. It is not going to end. I think that the gas lines alone they're going to be done street by street. That's a 9-month to a year operation.
So they don't do it at the same time?
No, they're going to do it street by street.
Well, I would think you would tear up a street and you'd put all the lines down in that street, all the ones you're talking about, and then cover it up. You say
no, and in fact, at the meeting that I was at today, that most definitely is not going to happen, because the crews would get into each other's way. So the gas people want to do all of their connections and move sequentially up the peninsula. When they're done on a street, in most cases they will tamp down, put a temporary patch, and then move on to the next one. After that, the city will come along with the water main replacement. And I learned today that the water main replacement down at the end of the peninsula is going to be the most complicated part of the 4 segments. And that's going to take time. And then after that, the complete streets work. And that's when you would do the undergrounding. when you're doing the sidewalk replacements, you would put all of those pipes underneath that. So let's not have any illusions. This is going to be with us for a while.
A
How
while being
long is
2
really
years?
was, pardon?
2 years, like?
Easily 2 years. What they said today is plan on 3 years from beginning to end, because each one of these major operations will take 9 months to a year in and of themselves. Now, once PG&E finishes a segment, when there's 4 segments, it is the case that the city can come in and start doing the water pipe work. So down at First and Chesapeake, when that whole segment, so all of the streets that are in the segment 1 are done and BG&E moves on, then the city could come in and start doing work there. So there is some overlapping, but I think that BG&E in particular, but also the public works staff who are on the call today, said, let's be upfront right away. This is going to be something going on the peninsula for quite a while. So we do,
Thank you.
the answer is, the silver lining there, besides getting complete streets, is there is time to get the undergrounding planned for. There is time to get it budgeted, both in terms of grants and not just the infrastructure grants, but other grants, or get it into the capital plan. We do need to start right now looking at what the cost of that is. Apparently it is, because of the nature of the pipes and the flexibility, not as expensive as you would think, as long as you're doing it while you're doing the other infrastructure work. If you have to come back afterwards and lay lines beside the sidewalks, which there's not always a lot of room to do. So it's ideal to do this when we're getting to the sidewalks and the final street repair. But that's a good question.
We have Harry Lockley, and then we have a question in the chat.
Okay.
So Mr. Lockley, you're up.
Hi, this is Sally Lockley. Hi, Ross.
Oh,
I'm
hi,
always
sorry,
identified
Sally.
as Harry. Can you hear me?
No, you're on.
Okay.
mute, Ross.
We can see you if you click your camera.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Can you
I
turn
said
it-
we can hear you. We can see you if you
Turn
click
it
your
He
camera
wants to
on,
see you.
your video.
Oh, well, you really don't want to see the mess that's happening in my house right now.
All right.
So my only, all right, I have an off-topic question. It's not about the BG&E. And is this the time to ask, or should I wait till the end?
This is the
ask it.
time. You can do it now, or you can do it at the end.
Okay, well, and you probably know what I'm going to ask. You've been really helpful getting us water, a path to the water at the end of wells. Is there going to be any more discussion about actual water access there?
Yes.
Yes.
So
So
right now, and if
right
everybody
now,
could
and if
mute,
everybody-
we wouldn't have this echo, but right now we do have the signed easement by both the city and Blue Heron Condominium. We do have in the budget the money to start to do the planning for some kind of a deck to go on out from the water side, probably next to the outfall, the stormwater outfall. And that will be the next step in the process. Not going to be a pretty step, but that is still the plan for the city.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for working on that.
Yeah, we'll keep our fingers crossed, but it is important to do.
Okay, it turns out we have 2 questions in the chat. The first one is from Katie George. And the question is, why will the BGE project stop at 6th Street?
That is a question that should be asked on the 6th of October when we have the town hall meeting. but it just means for this project, it stops. There's going to be throughout the city, the BG&E pipes that are old are corroding. And so eventually they're going to be replacing gas lines and then at the same time, the city water lines throughout the city. But this is the project that BG&E is undertaking for now. And then we'll move on to the next parts of the city. But that's one that they'll have to answer on the 6th of October, if they can answer it themselves then. But the gas line replacement will have to go on. I don't know if you've noticed in your neighborhoods. I've noticed in door knocking, Katie, you might have noticed this too. By some lots, I can smell gas and I'm thinking, uh-oh, something needs to be fixed here. So the lines are old, the lines are in jeopardy, and they're in jeopardy throughout the city. So it will move on.
And then the next question from Kevin Richards is, are you suggesting they, BG&E, will also connect to the buildings? Mute, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things that I want more detail on when we meet with them on the 6th is, do they just reconnect us to the old connection that went into the house from the main gas line? Or are they also going to be making repairs to those because it's the same kind of pipe and therefore subject to the same kind of potential corrosion and leaking? So that is a thing to be determined, but it could be messing up some front yards as well as cutting up sidewalks and streets. But the honest answer from me is I can't answer that definitively at this time. When BG&E comes and talks to us about the gas work, they'll have to give you the response to that.
Ross, Kevin Richards here. I guess I was thinking about the electric. If you put this infrastructure in with the underground electric, are they going to require everyone to connect to it, or are they going to connect everyone to it? We live on Batcher. They redid our gas lines a year or two ago, maybe longer. We have some underground. My neighbor's above ground. I'm underground.
Right. So obviously the power being in the conduit and not in your house isn't going to help anything. So the answer is, yeah, there'll have to be a way to connect from the undergrounding. And it's not just power, by the way, it's also the cable, both Verizon and Comcast.
No, I understand that. I have my power and cables underground. My neighbor didn't want to pay to have it put underground, so his is above ground. So you're really putting it underground is great, but are you going to require? Is someone going to require, the city going to require everyone hook up to it?
I cannot answer that at this point. Obviously, that's something that when we get into the detailed discussions about this undergrounding, and there may well have to be legislative action on that as well, and certainly cost considerations. So that's since this is an idea that has burgeoned up recently, those are some of the things. So that's a very good question, and I don't have an answer.
Okay. Yeah, we have a hybrid situation here where we have some homes are underground and some homes are above ground. So like I paid to have my electric put underground, but my neighbor has theirs running across my yard. So,
that doesn't sound very ideal. And
yeah.
also,
so I mean, it's something to think about as a requirement.
Right.
It's great to put it. It's great to put the infrastructure in, but
yeah,
if it's not used, you really haven't accomplished what you're trying to accomplish.
Exactly. And one of the things that we'd like to accomplish, and I have it down at the corner of my street in Chesapeake and Chester, is having a telephone pole sitting smack in the middle of the sidewalk so that the people with handicaps and mothers with strollers have to go out in the street to get around it, even though there's a sidewalk there. So
Bingo.
lots of work.
Next
All right.
we have Harold Siegel and then Vic Pasco.
Okay.
Hey, Ross. First, thank you for doing this. It's really, I like having these meetings so you can keep us informed what's going on in the city, et cetera, et cetera. This is really nice. I noticed there's some areas have sidewalks, and then all of a sudden there isn't a sidewalk, like down on here in Fifth Street. Were they going to go ahead and add, and maybe a little advanced to ask this, are they going to add sidewalking in the areas that don't have it?
My answer to that is yes. That would be, I think, desirable. I see sidewalks as a life safety issue. And when you have particularly young mothers, but also joggers and people, and they're on the sidewalk and then they're out in the street, there is in most areas a 6-foot set aside alongside of the street that is a city right of way. So there's place for those sidewalks, but like so many other things, there needs to be a budget to do that. But when we're doing complete streets, what an opportunity. Get the full complement of sidewalks in, get them, properly installed so we don't have the hodgepodge. So that would be my position is, yes, while we're doing complete streets, we're going to fill in all of the missing sidewalks.
Since you're talking about safety, can we bring up the issue again about some stop signs?
Yes, you can.
5th Street, 2nd Street, on Chesapeake and other areas. It just seems like it's the, particularly right in the corner here, 5th and Chesapeake. It's unbelievable. Half the cars stop, half don't. People are walking across on the sidewalk there in front of the elementary school. Cars don't know whether to stop or not. Yeah, I know you mentioned that we need a traffic director, but on the other hand, gee, it'd be nice just to throw up a couple stop signs.
Yeah, I agree with you, Harold. It seems to me that having a series of stop sign, and then no stop sign, when you go down Chesapeake and you get to 3rd Street, is that a stop sign or not? And when you get to 2nd Street, it certainly isn't. But I think stop signs, besides stopping accidents where people are pulling out, also help to moderate speed to some extent. So I think having a consistent pattern of signage so that people just get used to, I'm coming to an intersection, I have to slow down and stop. There's some other intersections over near SAYC where there's no stop sign in either direction. And so people are pulling out and people are barreling down and nobody has a stop sign. So I think that's an issue that really needs to be addressed. And what better time to do it than when you're doing the complete streets?
Thank you.
We did have Vic's hand up, but then it's not up anymore. So Vic, do you still want to talk?
Yeah, I'm just playing with the buttons.
Oh, okay.
2 things, Ross. I think that this is a great idea. It absolutely must be done now. We will never have this chance again. Once the streets are dug up, it's going to be another 50 years. I've always been one who said that we should get everybody connected at one time. If there's a cost to each homeowner, you can always put a lien on the house and it can be paid when the house gets sold. And that would prevent having to dig up the street once it's repaved, because that's the thing that I've seen time and time again, living here for over 20 years, that 4th Street is a great example. We paved it all over and then we redid the warehouse and the other places and we dug the whole street up again. It's just a complete waste of money. So do it all at once.
I totally agree with you, Vic. And that's why there's going to be, clearly this work is going to impinge on our lives, and it's going to impinge on our lives for a little while. But to me, there's 2 cherries at the end of the process. One is the complete streets, but the other is this potential for the undergrounding and get everybody underground. Let's not have a mixed mode. So I think, and I think there's time to plan this, there's time to find the money for it, but the time is now. Let's not let it get down the road and then say, oh, we should have thought of that. So, yeah, I agree with you, Vic. All right, where are we on questions?
I don't see any hands raised and I don't see anything in the chat. So it sounds like maybe people want to wait and hear what you have to say about the ADUs and, oh, wait, Heidi, did I see your hand, Heidi? You're on mute.
Briefly, I understand that it's going to take a couple of years, and in the pipeline, we've got Forward Brewing. I mean, the Adams Ribs redevelopment on 4th Street. We've got the potential major redevelopment up the way on at the shopping center, and the main thoroughfare artery is going to be compromised here. Do you think the city has is there any discussion about resources being provided to address the traffic? What is going to be clearly, you think traffic is bad now, but given those projects, is the city talking about even, I know we talked about stop signs or adding, we could barely get crosswalks. Is there going to be any relief to some of these traffic jams and problems?
So yes and no. I mean, obviously, this is all focusing down on the peninsula. A lot of the major traffic is coming down Bay Ridge and Chesapeake and going over the bridge, as you well know. I think those things will come up when we start doing the pipes, the gas and the water pipes there. But I think that there are good signs, because in this meeting that we had today, there was discussion about parking. Where do we have, how do we arrange for parking for people when their street is torn up? And BG&E was talking about purchasing nearby parking space, the shared parking kinds of things. And I think that the same kind of discussion with how do we manage traffic, particularly when we get out into the bigger thoroughfares. So yes, I mean, that is going to have to be on the agenda. I know that's not a fully satisfactory. I see you. It is going to have to be pressed, and it is going to have to be continually brought to the city's attention. It actually came up a little bit in our discussion at Rules Committee on accessory dwelling units, and with the noble goal of providing more housing on one side of the coin, we do have to look at all of the impacts of having more people and more cars. And that is a discussion that we only started to get into at Rules Committee. We'll pick it up when Rules meets again. It was a discussion with the Forest Drive sector study, and it's going to be a discussion with the comp plan, where we're talking about providing more housing. We're talking about more dense development with the missing middle, but we never talk about how are we going to get people to and from all of these more dense units. The old saw of, well, we'll have to improve public transportation. When have we changed public transportation in this city? So these things are going to force themselves to the forefront, and they will have to be faced up to. Sorry, I see. I know. I feel exactly your skepticism.
What we're looking for is there's no magic solutions. I just want the city to pay a little more attention and provide some more resources to maybe start looking at the things that we've had all of that traffic and parking study done. We've had Eastport has put a lot of effort into it, and the city seems to be looking the other way. I wonder if it's going to take a major crisis, like a traffic crisis, like we're going to face, for people to pay attention, to put the stop signs in, to put the crosswalks in, to put all of those resources in. And maybe you could tell us, do we have that traffic expert signed on for the city, or are we still without one?
We are without one, and as you know, to my consternation, there wasn't even a budget for one in this budget, recently passed budget. So it is certainly not, the indication is it's not a high priority in planning and zoning. I was pretty much a lone voice in the wilderness on that one on the council, and it's one of these things where budget trade-offs are being made every time we pass a budget. And when we're facing rising costs that are rising faster than revenues. But this is also something that needs to be a topic of discussion with the impending comprehensive plan. Comprehensive plan is unlikely to be ready for this term, but it will be ready for the next term. By the way, there is opportunity to give input going to the city website and going to planning and zoning. There is opportunity. In fact, Eric Lashinsky is begging for people to respond to the current draft plan and the current goals and so forth. And this is a good time for everybody to start making your voice heard on these. We have to look at the full impact of all of these things, even the good things, even the things that are noble causes have the other side of the coin, that are the costs that have to be addressed and tend to be ignored and tend to build up as crisis. Didn't say anything you didn't already know, but in any event. I think at this point, I do have time at the end of the agenda, and things are actually moving fairly quickly. But at this point, I'd like to get into a discussion of the accessory dwelling units, and I'd like to beg your indulgence. I want to walk through it through PowerPoint on the screen so that you can see it. I'm going to get through it as quickly as I can, and then we'll open the floor. I really, truly want as much input from you as I can. This will probably be on the agenda for the meeting the 1st of October for a final vote. And there's just a ton of issues. So if we can go to the next slide, Mark, that would be great. So this is a very complicated, controversial issue, many strong viewpoints, many noble goals, and many consequences that we have to talk about. So if we can go to the next slide, one of the things that has, oh, well, that's not, okay, yeah, terminology. So this came up at the meeting today. Accessory dwellings units is a specific kind of dwelling. There are also two-family dwelling units and then multifamily dwelling units, affordable housing and workforce housing. And I think these things are getting very confused. So Mark, if you can go to the next slide, the definition that I'm proposing as an amendment to the code is this definition of accessory dwelling unit, which is a specific kind of dwelling unit. And I'll read it: a dwelling unit that has a secondary to the principal household dwelling unit in terms of gross floor area, intensity of use, physical character, but has a kitchen and bath facility separate from the principal dwelling unit and may have a separate entrance. I think in our code, it will have a separate entrance. But the big distinguishing factor is, regardless of its physical form, whether it's a backyard cottage, a basement that's finished out, something over a garage, legally, an accessory dwelling unit is part of the same property as the main home. It cannot be sold or bought or sold separately. The owner of the ADU is the owner of the main house. Now, if we can quickly go to the next slide, Mark. Two-family unit is a different kind of thing. That's where on one lot you have two independent family units that are separated either laterally or horizontally, and they are separate, they're separately owned. And that is different than the accessory dwelling unit in the form of ownership and also the complete separation. The city and city code two-family dwelling units are generally treated the same way as multifamily townhouses, condominiums, those sorts of things. Next definition, please. So affordable housing, and we talked about this at Rules today, is housing that looks to the affordability of the housing. And HUD has definitions for when housing is affordable, and that's when the costs of housing are less than 30% of gross income. And you can see the definition here for affordable housing. And we do have mechanisms we're putting in place in the city to help support affordable housing, the Affordable Housing Fund that we're talking about. Next definition, I hope my voice lasts. Well, you may be blessed in it. One, the workforce housing, again, we talked about that at Rules today. That is housing that's focused on workers who work for the city, including teachers. And that's part of what the goal of the existing code for moderately priced dwelling units is. One can argue how successful that's been. Next slide, please. So going over quickly what's in the ordinance. The ordinance requires an annual report from planning and zoning. This speaks to the fact that we need to have some kind of notion as to what accessory dwelling units already exist and how many are being added to it. The ordinance deletes the section of code that prohibits accessory dwelling units. Next slide, please. The accessory dwelling units are a new use in the use tables, and that includes new uses in all of the single family districts. And I give you the list there. In theory, it eliminates, if everybody in these districts adopts having an accessory dwelling unit, there are no single family units left. I think that's an extreme exaggeration, but in theory. Next slide, please. So it adds standards for the uses, maximum of 1 ADU per lot, allows the ADU in primary structure or separate structure, requires by code the separate ingress, egress, and it limits the size of the square feet. There is an amendment that is on the table that may make that change. Next slide, please. I'm trying to do this quickly because I think most of you know all of this, but I want to reiterate. So it requires currently 1 off-street parking space for every ADU. That's also the subject of an amendment, which we'll get to in a minute. It requires, as all other rental units in the city, that the units be inspected and licensed. And it also, as currently submitted, does not allow short-term rentals. Next slide, please. So ADUs are permitted and used elsewhere. So what are the problems for Annapolis? And so this is a list of questions that I've heard. Will ADUs provide affordable housing? Will it add to the rental stock? I think the answer to that is yes, but the question is how much? Clearly, accessory dwelling units, one of the uses is to support mortgage payments, which would maybe allow people to get into a house that they couldn't ordinarily afford. Will ADUs change community character? That's a question from me to you. Next slide, please. Will the ADUs affect property values? Will they increase it? Will they drive it down? And then let's get into the 7 amendments. The next slide. The first amendment is to allow ADUs larger than 850 feet within the primary structure. So a new accessory unit that is separate on the lot, or one that is over an existing accessory structure like a garage, would still be required to be 850 feet, no bigger. But it could be, if you're modifying the existing house that you have with this amendment, that could be larger than 850 square feet. Second amendment drops the requirement for additional off-street parking. We had discussion about that in rules today, and there'll be more. Third drops the prohibition of short-term rentals. Alderman Schondelmeyer and Alderman Gay, the two sponsors, are split on their feelings on this. The fourth one requires that both structures have a common owner. Next slide, please. The fifth one prohibits, and we did have some significant discussion, prohibits the addition of increased impervious surface on the lot. And if there is increase, there has to be a way to treat it, and or you need to eliminate impervious surface elsewhere. Sixth Amendment, ADUs are the primary structure on any one lot, meaning the common ownership. This is a lot like the owner-occupied discussion that is going on with the short-term rentals. Next slide, please. Boy, we're whistling through here. So, other ADU concerns that I've heard raised. Right now, the code, the ordinance as submitted does not change setbacks or permeable surface. We went over that with both the Director of Planning and Zoning today and the city attorney. So all of the side yards, rear yard setbacks are still in place with this ordinance. And the requirement for impermeable space, depending upon where you are in the critical area, stays the same. Will accessory dwelling units bring additional traffic and parking burden? I think that's an important question. It speaks to what I call the other side of the coin. Will it have impacts on school capacity? If accessory dwelling units are going to allow young families to move to Annapolis, I think that the answer to that is yes, but is that a good thing or a bad thing? What other adequate public facilities will it affect? As we know, adequate public facilities is currently under consideration with the Eastport Shopping Center, and whether we are meeting the adequacy, certainly things like police. I've heard concerns about with a more dense neighborhood, you're going to have crowding and noise. And finally, skepticism on whether additional housing will be affordable. I think that will vary across the city, but these are questions I've heard. Next slide, please. So that didn't turn out to be such a long presentation. I hope it whets appetite for a lot of commentary on your part. And I will just tell you going into this that I am truly agonizing over this whole decision. I hear very strong points of view from all sides of the spectrum. I think providing affordable housing is a noble goal, but I need to get your comments to help me in determining what amendments, and by the way, there's two other amendments that are coming, but didn't get in time for review by the Office of Law. So this is your time. I'm all ears. I have a pad of paper. I will take notes just as I did at Rules Committee. So if we can get thank you. Thank you. So it is time for people to raise hands and give input.
And Phyllis is up first.
Hi. On the fact that we're concerned about whether the accessory dwelling unit is affordable, I think that's kind of one of the key points here, isn't it? That we want to expand it so that it'll be affordable. Is there any way that you can make sure that any new, well, I don't know, some people already have these dwellings, some want to build them. I suppose you could do something with the ones that get approved for new, but the old ones, I mean, can you say, okay, you have to make them affordable? I don't know. I mean, is there any way of doing that?
This came up at Rules today, but it's also conversations I've had with colleagues on the council. There is discussion about rent controls. not allowing these to be rented out for over a certain amount. There's also housing and urban development rules about affordable housing being no more than 30% of gross income. And so there's discussion of an amendment that says that these units can only be rented at the HUD determined rate for the area. HUD sets rates for areas all over the country, housing areas. They're usually about 80% of the market rate. And one of the things that can be done to the legislation is to add an amendment that says that there's a limit to the amount of rent that can be charged for these units.
This would be the
Obviously,
new ones, right? This would be new ones.
yeah, of course, you bring up another, Phyllis, you're just so good. Yeah, another
Sorry.
thing we discussed was, what do we do about all the existing
Yeah.
units? And particularly since there are a lot of existing units that are more than one dwelling unit in a single family unit. In fact, most often 3. There's 2 I know of that are 5. How does this impact them? There isn't any discussion about grandfathering, and there isn't in this legislation, and maybe that's something to come in the next term. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, if the goal is affordable housing, then we need to do proactive things to make sure that this is affordable. But you have to understand, when you do that, you also disincent the supplier of the housing. If they make the investment to do an affordable housing unit, which is not trivial, I've looked at it myself, they're going to want to have a return on their investment as rapidly as possible. And so if you put in rent controls or HUD controls, you can disincent people making this step. And there's a trade-off. There's an economic equilibrium that will have to be found depending upon how we finally pass the rules. But so you've raised some very good points that I think still need to be thought through. So thank you for those questions. And I see Heidi's
Okay.
hand up.
We've got Diane and then Heidi, and then we also have some comments in the chat. So let's go Diane, Heidi, and then we can take a look at the chat. So Diane, you need to unmute.
Working on it. This is not Diane, it's John.
Well, how could I tell? There's no visual.
Oh, here, let's see. Maybe I can do that. Anyway, it's more a comment, Ross, but you're looking for input. You mentioned the short-term video rental. Sorry, I'm looking at video. And so clearly that's contrary to affordable housing. I mean, short-term rentals are always going to be non-affordable rates unless the rent control is tied with that. So I assume hopefully any accessory ADU legislation that would allow short-term rental would require rent controls on those short-term rentals in the ADU, because otherwise this is going to be, this contrary to affordable housing.
So let me answer that in a little bit of depth, because I think that there is a fear that this legislation is going to lead to wholesale changes in the housing stock in the city. And of course, that's one of the desired goals for those that want to provide more affordable housing. I think that the reality is that even those people who have strongly espoused accessory dwelling units is that it may change the housing stock by 1 or 2%. Nobody's talking about wholesale changes, but if the underlying goal, and I think the sponsors and supporters of the legislation all say they want more affordable housing in the city, it seems to me that allowing short-term rentals, and this is my personal view that I'm putting on the record, is absolutely antithetical to creating more affordable housing with one caveat there, but that it would encourage more investment in these and more short-term rentals. Now, actually two caveats. There is a finite amount of demand for short-term rental space. You can glut the market with a space such that people won't be able to rent those units. You can also have COVID come along where people don't want to rent those units. So there's an economic equilibrium that can be found. But really, if you're using short-term rental, you allow short-term rentals, the only people that will benefit are the homeowner themselves that now has this ancillary source of income, which may well be the highest return on investment, maybe higher than they can get to do a long-term rent. But I really think that both the incentive to bring in investors who are going to buy properties and have part of it an accessory dwelling unit, which is not providing additional housing in that sense, it just seems antithetical to the goals of the sponsors. And I think the goals of a lot of the people in the city that want to see more housing available to people that can't buy in right now. So that's how I would answer you, John. But that's me talking. I really want to hear your views.
Okay, next up is Heidi, then Bill Reichard is blowing up the chat, and then Jim Wildy.
Briefly, I think we all get behind the idea of accessory dwelling units if it makes it for people that can afford their houses. And as an environmentalist, I think it's great. We're putting a little bit more density in. We're not putting urban sprawl, and I think there are good things. But realistically, you've got a bill that has a lot of parts to it, and the city has no enforcement. So I don't think that there's anything in that bill that is the enforcement. And I want to use an example. You get for when you build a property here in Annapolis and you want to bump it up 15% higher, if you provide a certain number of affordable housing units, you can build higher like they did here in Eastport. And I know you look at it and those people that have rented it, I've met my neighbors, they are not needing affordable housing. The income level is extremely high. And so they got a bump up for building that building for affordable housing, yet the people that are in there are. And so that I think is a failure of the legislation to address these needs. And I think that you're talking about ways to address it, to make it so that people that need that housing move in. We don't have teachers in there. We have retired folks that can afford this. And I think we will continue to draw that crowd unless there really is something more in there. And I would ask that question again. What's the deal with enforcement? Is there any discussion in it when you talk about it? And is there any way to ensure these HUD limits would be even looked at?
So thank you for those questions. And there's multiple questions in there. The current legislation as submitted requires annual reporting by planning and zoning. And that presumes that they are going to have to know what the stock of existing and, as we add to it, new accessory dwelling units are going to be. But as we know from short-term rentals, there are 353 licensed short-term rentals. There's probably twice that number of rental properties that are put out for short-term rental that aren't inspected and licensed. So you're absolutely right. We can write the best possible code that you've ever seen. If it's not enforced, if it is not a priority with the staff, if we don't budget for the amount of staff that is necessary to pay attention to this, it is not going to have any teeth. So I think there is the other comment that I would make is that the cost of housing across the city is quite variable. And while we can't write legislation that is specific to wards, I think the economics of the situation are that accessory dwelling units are going to be much more economically feasible in areas where the cost of the housing in place is lower, so that you can buy a house as either someone who's going to develop it and flip it, or as a young new owner or whatever, and add the accessory dwelling unit and supplement your income. So I think that there are often a lot of market forces here that are going to um, contain this, but as you point out, without enforcement, and I mean meaningful enforcement, and part of that enforcement is annual inspection and licensure, just as we have for those short-term rentals that have gone through the process and are inspected and licensed every year. If we don't have that, and we don't support the staff to do that, we're not going to have a good program. So thank you for that question.
Okay, I think you started touching on what some of Bill's comments in the chat were, so I'm just going to read them and then speak as you want to. So the first point was, since the city does not know how many ADUs are currently operating outside of the statute, shouldn't we know how many and where ADUs exist before permitting new ADUs in all districts? Then number two, the city has a dismal history for zoning enforcement. Why no provisions for enforcement of standards in the proposed statute? And then the final point that he's making is, why isn't the ADU legislation being coordinated with the current development of the comprehensive plan, which deals with housing, transportation, and environmental impacts for future planning for the next 20 years?
So let me do some active listening and make sure that I've heard all three questions. And
we can do them one at a time if that's
okay,
easier.
so I think, and Bill, I did take the coalition questions to the Rules Committee meeting today, and we just didn't have time to get to it. But that was the very first thing that was brought out by the coalition is, shouldn't we know what we have before we go on? And that was in part a reason for my making the comment that in door knocking, I identified at least 125 single family buildings that had multiple family units in it. And so I think that there can be a way to identify what's already in place just by looking at addresses. And I think that that is something that needs to be done. Whether it's on somebody's work agenda, I don't think that it is on their agenda. So I think that's something that has to be an enhancement to the current legislation, remembering that we need to have 5 votes to get that amendment in the legislation and passed. Your second question, I think, is somewhat of a follow-on on that, which is enforcement. Again, the way the current legislation is written, and I have no reason to assume that will change, it requires that Title 17.44 be followed, which requires that anyone who wants to have an accessory dwelling unit, I assume this means either existing but not licensed or used, or new, has to be inspected and licensed, just like all other rental properties across the city. So that is an enforcement in code. Whether it's an enforcement in practice, again, that's a another question. And in terms of your last one, the comprehensive plan, and I know that you and the coalition are digging into that now. Pardon me?
That's my job.
Whoop.
So your head's always tilted.
I'm hearing something. Bill, did you say something?
No, I don't think it was directed
okay.
to you, Ross.
All right. So it is part of the comprehensive plan. One of the overall goals of the comprehensive plan is to deal with the housing stock in Annapolis, affordable housing. That's the whole discussion in the comprehensive plan about the missing middle, which is the higher density housing. Turns out that Ward 8 has a lot of missing middle. It's kind of surrounding our shoreline, you know, starting with Shearwater and President's Point and moving over to Tecumseh and Severn 100 and Chesapeake Landing and then Horn Point condominiums and then Severn House and I'm missing one. And I had this discussion with Alderwoman Finlayson, and she said, well, that's not really what affordable housing is. None of that is affordable housing. And so that's where this dilemma of trying to do accessory dwelling units and thinking that it's providing affordable housing, I don't think that's anywhere as close to a one-for-one matchup. So in the comprehensive plan, there's a lot of discussion about the missing middle, a lot of discussion about smart growth where you build more densely in the already developed areas, you redevelop in the developed areas. There's very little new land. There is some. An example is the Spa Road facility for the former Public Works location. That's a city-owned property. And a lot of us are talking about how that should be given, affordable housing should be given first priority there. There's an affordable housing proposal to redevelop or to develop the now vacant Rocky Gorge property along Aristide Allen next to Y'all Road. So there are opportunities throughout the city for more missing middle. I'll get to you in a second. So it is in the comprehensive plan. But that's a work in progress. So I'll stop and listen to you, Bill.
Well, just a follow-up question, Ross, and thank you for addressing those earlier questions. Because we're in the middle of developing the comprehensive plan, and because the goals and metrics of even the draft plan up to this point actually talks about reducing increasing rather, the number of affordable housings. It breaks it down in terms of what is affordable housing and low-income housing and so forth. I mean, it's getting to be pretty specific in the comprehensive plan drafts. Why wouldn't the city council simply remand this legislation to the people who are working on the comprehensive plan, leave this for further public comment for maybe another year? The comprehensive plan will be produced for city council vote by next year. And it would seem to me we would have an ADU piece to that, which is well thought out and fits with what is ultimately determined to be the comprehensive plan. Why not do that?
The simple answer is it depends upon where 5 votes are. I can't tell you at this point if when this goes to the city council agenda on the first meeting in October, I don't really know where the vote's going to be. I know that there's a lot of thinking that's going on about it and a lot of questions that are still being asked, but it depends upon whether there's 5 votes to move ahead or 5 votes to say we need to get the benefit of the comprehensive plan. So I know that's kind of a non-answer, but it's the best one I have. I think what you're talking about makes sense in some regards. On the other hand, I can tell you in listening to my colleagues, Schondelmeyer and Gay, they said it today, it rules. We've been waiting 2 years already. Remember, this is the second ADU piece of legislation that came up in this term, and we're tired of waiting. And they also tend to be representative of people who are not homeowners at this point and want to be homeowners and want to be reflective of other people either in the community or want to be in the community that want to be homeowners. So, I don't know how to tell you. Prudence, it seems to me, would dictate that we go through the whole rigor of developing the comp plan, but there is a zeal on the part of some to pass something as soon as possible. And that's going to come down to who votes how.
Hi, Jim Wildy has been waiting very patiently, and then we have some more comments in the chat.
Yes, I'll be very quick. I think I heard what Heidi had to say about the enforcement aspect of this, and I think we're just way off the scale on terms of expecting the city to enforce this. So I don't know how we're, even if we put some specific language in there, I doubt that the city is going to be effectively enforcing this. So I don't know where to go with this, but I echo Heidi's sentiment that the enforcement is just going to be really, really, really difficult. Anyway, that's it.
Jim, I thank you for that comment. And we've had this conversation, and we've had this conversation really across the board. When it comes time to devote funds largely to planning and zoning, and more specifically to beefing up the code enforcement staff, they're just not forthcoming. It hasn't been a priority with any mayor who's developed a budget, and it has competed with other demands, like what do we do to get our police department up to full strength on sworn officers so that we can move into true community policing. So I think some of this is budget issues, but a lot of it is priority making on the part of the administration. The council is charged with passing legislation. And as I said earlier, we can pass the best possible legislation in the world if it's in with enforcement language in it. And there is enforcement language in a lot of, particularly Title 21, but also 17 and 15. But if it's not enforced, for the current ongoing thing about enforcement of the adequate public facilities, the Board of Appeals found that 5 different adequate public facility criteria were not met, and they've gone through 3 iterations. It's now in circuit court. But if you don't have a staff that is enforcing, then you're not going to have a good outcome, in my view. And the one time that the council has purview over that is budget time. And in budget time, the tough questions are, why aren't we enforcing APF? Why aren't we enforcing demolition rules? Why aren't we enforcing silt screens in construction sites so that we're not letting stuff spill into the Quiet Waters Park? That's our crack at it. One of the things that the Environmental Matters Committees did, which I know was tough love, but we did at the last council meeting, was to ask staff to come up and explain to us why they weren't paying attention to the silt screens. And we're allowing silt to trickle out into, and so I think the council does have the ability to step up in that way. And hopefully we will follow that example from the Environmental Matters Committee in these other enforcement areas. But it is a perennial problem in the city. And I'm certainly all ears on how we change that and beef up that enforcement.
Okay, we have some comments in the chat. One from Brooks Schondelmeyer. His comment is more affordable than single family homes, Ross.
Okay.
Hey, buddy.
And then from someone, and I'm dying to know who this is, the old lady who lives in the shoe. It has 2 points to make. How is adequate public facilities factored here in the aggregate? And 2, does the city do a good job informing the county of these upgrades such that when the property is reassessed for property tax value, the city may collect more revenue?
All right. So 2 good questions. And I've already talked about APF as the other side of the coin that is producing more affordable housing. And when that's done without paying attention to traffic and parking and level of police, adequacy of schools, and those sorts of things, it's not good policy. And so you have to look at the whole picture. In terms of how does this affect the appraisal value and up the taxable base? If in fact these properties are inspected and licensed, I think that is something that will filter its way into the assessable base. But remember how the tax assessment is done. It's basically state staff who work with realty companies, and they drive through neighborhoods and they look at list price and things like that. And that's how they determine the amount your assessed value is going to go up. So it's very gross level thing. It is certainly not done house by house. And I'm not even sure, since this is a statewide program, I'm not even sure that there's the resources to do that. So as affordable housing units or accessory housing units go in, and they either drive up or drive down the price of the property, that'll eventually be felt in the real estate values, and that eventually will show up in the taxable base. I don't know if that was an understandable response, but that's my understanding of how things work.
Okay. The next one is from Barbara Beeler. We must not allow passage of a bill which cannot be enforced. It only weakens citizens' view of government, which feeds the horrible political dynamics in our country.
All right, so that's a very good point, but it's kind of the input I'm looking for help from all of you. I'm open to things that we can do, licensing and inspecting for the people who play by the rules is a way to start enforcement, but that's not proven to be enough for short-term rentals, and I don't think there's any reason to expect any other performance for accessory dwelling units. So I'm all for adding amendments that will beef up the enforcement. And maybe this is a question when rules gets back together and we meet with planning and zoning. Dr. Nash was there for rules today that we put to her. She's in charge of the staff that do the inspections and enforcement. What kinds of things do we need to do? What kinds of tools do we need to give you, Dr. Nash, to ensure better enforcement?
Okay. From Vic Pasco, how about we fire staff that doesn't do their job?
Okay. I spent 32 years as a federal bureaucrat and senior manager, and most of that as a manager. And I didn't actually fire because some people left before, but I had 3 really bad employees, one of which was fired and 2 of which left before firing. But I can tell you that takes years of documenting, making strong performance appraisals and documenting. And in my experience, most managers duck that responsibility. So firing in a civil service organization with unions, which is the federal circumstance, is, shall we say, easier said than done. I understand the passion with which that comment is said, but the reality of it is, I think it has to do more with policy at the senior management level in the administration and a mindset change there. I spoke a few minutes ago about calling people out when they don't properly enforce the silt fencing and other environmental controls. I think that if we call people out a couple of times on how do we come across all of these units that weren't inspected and licensed at a city council meeting, that may have a change in behavior. It also has to be the goal of the primary manager of the city staff, which is the combination of the mayor and the city manager. They have 627 full-time equivalent reports, and they need to make this part of their mission.
Okay, and then the final comment in the chat is from Barbara Beeler again. Yes, Ross, why are we not enforcing all the things you mentioned? It should not be tough love to have staff appear and explain its inaction.
Well, it shouldn't be, but it is. I think that's the first time at a department head level with specific worker bees that they were called out with photographic evidence, which thankfully we had a lot of very diligent citizens take photographs of all of the things that weren't being done. I think once people know that there's going to be public accountability, and once senior management knows that accountability is going to happen, that could change some attitudes. But Barbara, you're right. It shouldn't be tough love. It should be basically your job. You should be doing your job to the fullest and correctly. But we know that doesn't always happen.
Okay, and Harold Siegel has his hand up.
Hey, Ross.
Hey.
Yeah, I was just recalled there was an article in the, I think it was the Gazette. Do you have any comment on the fiasco over at the water treatment plant?
Okay, first of all, do you mean the water purification plant, the one?
Yeah, you know, they're the effluent has not been purified and they're dumping into the
yeah, that is the county's thing. Of course, it's reprehensible.
Isn't the city's? It's not the city at all.
The city has wells and settling tanks and so forth to provide our potable water, but all of our sewage goes across Back Creek at 2nd Street and into the county's sewer treatment plant over on Edgewood Road. Okay. So that is something that we need to get the county to answer to. But to be quite honest, Harold, you're giving me news. I have been a little bit busy with elections and with legislation, but I missed that story.
Okay. Yeah, it was quite an article, and I thought it was. I thought the treatment plant was a city facility. It is not.
No.
Okay.
No. All right.
Okay, before we go to the chat, again, Laura, you had your hand up. Did you change your mind?
Let's see. I I almost changed my mind, but you've encouraged me to come back. I just wanted to put my face out there because I am an owner of a walkout basement apartment. So in full disclosure, I'm in Rob Savage's ward, not Mr. Arnett's. And I just wanted to listen in to the conversation and the concerns that were expressed. I am very interested in the concerns. I'm also interested in promoting the pros of ADUs because I do have a walkout basement apartment and I have renters in there even as I speak. I'm a big proponent of the economic benefits of ADUs. I'm in a very interesting situation because I didn't build onto my home, but it was here when I got here, and it was actually something that compelled me to come to this place. It does help me greatly offset my
It's the
financial
message, not
burdens.
the messenger.
Sorry?
If there's a fallacy.
I'm sorry, I just heard somebody else speaking. It helps offset my financial burdens. I am doing short-term rentals presently. It's not what I see doing forever. It's just what I can manage time-wise now. It is a time commitment. You don't get rich off of it, but it'll help me pay my taxes. And then I have elderly parents, and so it's a space that I will use for them soon, I imagine. And then one day I imagine I might just want to rent it out long term. And I feel like these should be options that owners of ADUs have. And like I said, I feel like I spread the love. I bring tourists here who prefer to be in a space that feels like home. And I refer them to many, many businesses in Annapolis. And so that an economic benefit spreads widely and from use of public transportation, including the water taxis, to the many restaurants and shops that I'm proud of the fact that I'm able to provide this for visitors to Annapolis.
Thank you for that. I think I'm familiar with you've made this presentation before, and there's no doubt that there are multiple aspects to accessory dwelling units, one of which is making home ownership more affordable, but also the care of family and also the ability to have caregivers living on premise so that you can age in place. This is not something new to Annapolis, and it's not something new, period. It's been going on for a while, but there is no doubt that making home ownership more affordable is one of the aspects of an accessory dwelling unit. So thank you for that input.
Thank you for listening.
Sure. And thank you for coming. We always welcome everybody. The last meeting, we had a group of people from Ward 1, I think because short-term rentals was still hot, but anyone's welcome to attend these meetings.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Okay,
All right.
We have more comments in the chat, and just mindful of time, it's 8:34, so we'll try to get through these so that everyone has a chance. This is from Bill Borwegian. I think that's how you say his name. On another topic, before we run out of time, there is a 6-foot wide city-owned right-of-way to the water's edge directly across from the EDC. Recently, someone planted a tree directly in the middle of this pathway to water's access. I've spoken to you and Eric. Eric wants to put in the long-term comprehensive plan You have not been able to get DPW to do their job to clear this 6-foot wide path. I have a chainsaw. It would take a few hours at most to clear this path. Am I missing
serious.
something here? I know, I can tell.
I'm dead serious. It's a 2-hour job. It's an embarrassment that we can't do something so simple.
Okay,
So Bill, I did bring that to the city manager and city attorney's attention, and they have spoken to the property owner. And
There is no property owner. The city's the property owner.
No, that's not correct. The city has a right of way, but Mr. Kelly and the McGuckians own that. They took it over by quitclaim, and which was something that I fought years ago, but the city office of law let that happen. However, it is a right of way, and the city manager has approached the property owner and said that needs to be addressed, and if not, and they're giving them time to respond, the city will come and clear it. And we have the ability to do that. So it is a work in process. I thank you for pointing it out. And I got right on it, and I got a very immediate response from the city manager, who immediately had this situation pointed out to the property. It's on Mr. Kelly's property, who does not live there, and they're giving him some time to take care of the situation. He can replant the tree off of the right of way and on his property, or the city can come in and cut it and cut all of the growth that's right at the catchment basin, which, by the way, is not only blocking access to the water, but is deteriorating the city's concrete there at the catchment basin. So the city public works people have an interest in writing that. So I know these things happen slowly, but it is a work in progress, and we will get on it. And as always, and this goes for everybody, send me an email. I'm juggling a million things. So Bill, you sent me emails to get the ball rolling. Send me an email reminding me that I need to follow up. That's a help to me.
Ross, if he owns the property, then why does he have to clear it? I don't understand. He either owns the property or doesn't own the property, right?
Because
why does he have to clear it if he owns the property?
Right. Let me explain, because
Okay.
At your prompting, we pulled out the deed when the quitclaim was filed, and on the easement, it clearly says that there's a 10-foot, not 6 feet, 10-foot right of way. 4 feet is on the McGuckins property and 6 feet on Mr. Kelly's property. But it says that clearly in the easement, on the deed, on the plat, that it is a water access point. Lots of owners like to kind of forget about that and hope nobody pays attention. But you were vigilant and you brought it to my attention. And so it is a water access point. So even though the property belongs to the two adjoining owners, it still has that easement on the plat, which says they have to make it available to access to the water.
Well, thank you, Russ, and for following up on that. And I just noticed the tree was still there a week later, and again, I could easily take that down in like a half an hour. So
please don't do that. But
okay, no, well, if it's not the city property, I won't. But I'm not a lawyer. I'm sorry, but you know.
Yeah, no, but
so there will be water access, is what you're telling us.
Yes, it is.
And so what I would suggest is like a little kayak dock right there. That would be fabulous for the community, you know.
And that's something that we can put into our capital plan. We're trying to get floating docks back at all of the street ends, and this is an alley in, but all of those areas so that people can launch kayaks and paddle boards.
Thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you for bringing it to my attention. And I want to thank the city staff, and particularly the city manager, for a very immediate response. It's my remission that I didn't get back to you to give you the full details, and I apologize for that, but we are on it.
Well, I'm using this opportunity to let everybody on this call know, so we can I'm not the only one that walks down that street and goes to EDC. So now we all know that this is going to be this is going to be access to the water for everyone on this call and everyone in our communities. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. And the day that I walked it, which is the day after you sent me the email, I walked it with Dick Peterson. So I have a witness that we were down there, we checked it out, and so forth. So it's on the radar. We may not be bringing it home as quickly as you would like, but it will be brought home.
Thanks, Ross.
You're quite welcome.
Okay, we have more in the chat, but Barbara Beeler has raised her hand. So, but Ross, you have to give shorter answers, please, because we're running out of time and there's lots in the chat.
I have a quick question with a short answer, yes or no. You said there will be water access. Is that water view, or will it be water access in which kayaks and other watercraft, small watercraft could be launched?
Yes. No, it is actually.
Thanks, Ross.
It is the ability to go down there and get into the water.
Okay.
That's
Thank
what
you.
is on the plat, the easement.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, the next comment in the chat is from Elvia Thompson. The department heads serve at the pleasure of the mayor, correct? If department employees don't do their jobs, that should affect the department head's job security.
Yes.
Okay, nice brief
Trying to be
answer.
short. No, Elvia, I take your point. And I think it's something that has been lax for a long time. Again, I point to that action that Rob Savage initiated from our Environmental Matters Committee, and Ellie Tierney and I both supported it. We need to call people out and make it uncomfortable to not do your job. And that's something that's now part of the mission for the council. You're right, they serve at the pleasure of the mayor. Department heads are selected by the mayor but approved by the council. But after that, it's really the mayor who has the full control over the department heads and what they do or don't do.
Okay. Next up is from Jess Packler. If according to the city law office, water access at Wells Cove means water view only, does that determination now apply to all public water access in the city?
No. Trying to be brief, but no, Jess, it first of all, as you know, there's a lot of debate about the Office of Law's finding on that regard. The way that the council can deal with a finding from the Office of Law, if we don't agree with it, is a legislative correction. You've seen me already do legislation to change the port wardens rules and how they look at water access and lateral lines. And you also saw the resolution that I wrote to bring this up, and also with the water access at South Annapolis Yachting Center. So to the extent that the city attorney has an opinion that is contrary to the policy objectives of a majority of the council, the way we address that is through legislation. But in my view, and my druthers, no, that very restrictive view of the particulars of Wells Cove does not apply to any other street in water access point. The lucky thing about the one that we were talking about by the Democratic Club is that was very specific on the plat. There wasn't any equivocation there. It said specifically access to the water, meaning getting into the water. So the way that was written.
Wait, it said meaning to getting into the water? Because the one
Yes.
at Wells Cove clearly says access to the water. I mean, it's ridiculous that you can read one way and one. I mean, I know you've worked on it really hard, but I just want everybody on here to realize that the city has determined that the public water access that written on a plat in the lower income part of Eastport, the city law office and administration has determined it does not mean actually getting to touch the water, but the public water access that's written on the plat in the high income part of Eastport does mean being able to access the water. And there's a serious concern here because both plats say public water access.
I mean, Jess, I agree with you, and I'm working this. But the city attorney
I
does
was
not
saying that for
report
the
them.
rest of the town hall. I
Yeah.
know you're working.
Good, thank you. But I feel as passionate about it as you do. You've lit a fire in me, and I've been on this now for many months.
Okay, next from Phyllis. What have you done to protect all street and water access locations?
So part of the answer is they are protected to the extent that the city hasn't given them away on quitclaim. They're protected because it's city property and it's on the city plats and so forth. But more what we're doing now is making sure that we have floating docks at the end of each of the city docks. We're going to get one at the end of 3rd Street on Spa Creek and the end of 6th Street on Back Creek. And as part of our capital budget plan to go back and replace or restore all the floating docks at the end of each one of the street end parks to have true access to the water. But that is in the works, and it's also on the marching orders for the harbor master, who has the primary responsibility for making sure that all that water access is available.
Okay, next is a comment from Jess regarding ADUs. Not only citywide, but here in Ward 8, not all of Eastport is wealthy, not all homes are high value, not even all of Ward 8. ADUs allow those who live in lower property value housing to be able to afford their homes and stay in their neighborhood. And a false statement was made regarding short-term rentals. I have a family of 6. Short-term rentals are the only way we can afford to travel because the cost is always less than hotels or bed and breakfasts.
Yes. Now, I agree with what you're saying, and that is certainly one of the purposes of accessory dwelling units is to supplement income for the homeowner and allow them to stay there. But I do want to point out one of the things is if you don't have an accessory dwelling unit in your home now, pretty much no matter where you live in the city, that is a major investment. It is not something you snap your fingers and you're going to have an accessory dwelling unit. 10 years ago, I looked into the cost of putting a unit over top of my garage. And the low bid I got for that small space was $122,000. And I can't imagine that's gotten cheaper. So while if you have it and you can do it quickly and conveniently, but there is an upfront barrier to entry in the cost of providing an accessory dwelling unit that meets code. So it's not a panacea, and that's why the people who talk about the value of accessory dwelling units say themselves that it is best is going to add 1 or 2% to the housing stock. There's a real cost to entry for accessory dwelling units. So the goals are laudatory and the outcomes are potentially good, but getting into that as accessory unit is not a snap of the fingers. I'm sorry, that was more than yes.
Well, but you are doing better at shortening your answers. So then from Seth L. is a question, Ross, will you be addressing maritime zoning this evening?
I can do it briefly. And this is sort of getting towards the end of the agenda, but the Maritime Task Force has completed their report. I have not seen it yet, but I understand that there is going to be a resolution on the city council agenda Monday to accept the task force report as a strategic plan, to also initiate a water access plan, commission it, and also to initiate a Annapolis Maritime Industry Fund that would be monies that will help retain and recruit maritime businesses, secondary, tertiary maritime businesses, particularly on the land intensive uses. From there, that will go to a public hearing, which will probably be on the agenda for the first meeting in October. And from there, it will go to the Rules and City Government Committee, who will hold their own hearings. And in fact, the chair of that committee, Alderwoman Finlayson, talked about that today at the end of our Rules Committee. We're probably going to have to schedule a number of Rules Committee meetings hard on in order to get a recommendation in time for passage at the very last council meeting of the term. I'm not sure that that's going to happen. We'll work to make sure, but just like with accessory dwelling units, there's a huge amount of detail there. There's a huge amount of things that need to be sorted out. I will say that the planning staff, after the first reader submission, has submitted a lot, I mean, pages of amendments to the ordinance, which I think make very big improvements to the legislation, including a topic that has been discussed here tonight, which is a lot of things to do enforcement. And the Planning Commission unfortunately didn't get a chance to discuss those changes in any detail. I wasn't able to make the last Planning Commission meeting, so Diane, I don't know how things turned out for that, but there's a lot on that agenda. I don't think it's a wasted effort. I think that the legislation, if it doesn't get through this term, can very easily be reintroduced. But the two ancillary things, along with the strategic plan from the task force, the water access plan, are right along the lines of things that we've just been discussing in the last few minutes. And Wendy O'Sullivan from the Parks and National Parks is heading up that effort, and she's got a lot of really good ideas. And the same thing for establishing this Maritime Industry Fund. There's a lot of meat there, but it's very, very skeletal, and there's going to have to be a lot of work to bring that into a reality.
Right. So Ross, if I may, can you hear me?
I can. I don't know who's speaking,
Great.
but
So
I can.
it's Seth. I'm the one who wrote the question.
Oh, sure.
So my understanding, Ross, well, not my understanding, my knowledge is that within Eastport, within your district, we have both WMM zoning, WME zoning. I don't know that there are any properties zoned WMI. What is your position then on the task force? Well, you said you haven't seen the report. But
No, I have seen the report.
You have seen, you just said you haven't.
Oh, yeah.
So, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So you have.
Yeah. So my position on the WMM was made clear a couple of Decembers ago when I submitted an ordinance that was specific to helping the WMM. The WMM is large, it's on Spa Creek, and it's largely maritime office space. And I was convinced there's several big properties there. The Annapolis City Marina is one, but also 222 Severn and also Yacht Haven. I am convinced that they are in some distress. The requirement for a maritime office space with the advent of the web, the internet, has declined dramatically. And they are having difficulties, demonstrated difficulties in getting renters into that office space. And so I think they do need help. The WME, we have 2 land intensive marinas in the WME. One is South Annapolis Yachting Center and the other's over at Eastport Yachting Center. The legislation for them is ambiguous. And then there's smaller ones like the former Moeller Marine are also in the WME. And we're going to have to look at, and I know both Horn
Yeah, but
Point
Ross,
Marina.
if I may interrupt you for a moment, I'm sorry. So you just stated that 2 Decembers ago, which I believe is accurate, December of 2019, is you were notified by the Annapolis City Marina that they were losing a large tenant, and that they were concerned they would have the ability to properly fill that space with a tenant that, frankly, could pay its bills, right? So my concern is how, knowing that the other properties that are within the Eastport Peninsula especially also have office space. You just noted 2 of them, South Yacht Yard there and also Eastport Yacht Center among them. What would be the differentiating factor between those locations and the WME and the WMM properties? I mean, they all have office space, right? Diane, is that an issue? I'm sorry, I'm seeing you shake your head.
No, I'm listening to your question. There are 4 maritime districts. They each were developed because they had their own characteristics at the time in 1987 when the maritime legislation was developed. The WMM was developed recognizing already that there was a lot of maritime office space there. The WME had its own characteristics. The WMI, which is the industrial area over on Back Creek on the other side of Back Creek, and the WMC, which is downtown. They're all different.
Okay, but Ross, now again, not to stop you or be argumentative, but that was then in 1987. And as you just pointed out, this is now. So here we are in 2021 addressing an issue that was brought up in December of 2019, which is very real in that there's very, very similar, if not identical properties around the Eastport Peninsula where you're favoring one zoning to the other and allowing, among other things, that office use, right?
No, I don't accept that characterization, but let me tell you what happened. I introduced Ordinance 1520, which was specifically directed at the WMM and was specifically directed to try to retain the maritime, but help that particular district with their inability to fill their office space. That is the maritime district that has a lot of office space, and they were the ones that were having trouble. That legislation was specifically initiated because of the Annapolis City Marina, and the Office of Law opined that because the Annapolis City Marina was created by a business plan development, my legislation could not address their issue. They had to go back and amend their business plan development. And the events overtook that. I eventually withdrew that legislation because of the opinion of the Office of Law, but also because the Maritime Advisory Board came to me and said, look, we don't want to continue to do piecemeal zoning. We want to look at all of the zoning districts together, which is the charge and what the Maritime Task Force has done. So, and they're coming up with recommendations, and one of their major recommendations is to retain the 4 separate districts because of their separate identities. So, and this will be a topic of another town hall meeting, and it is a very important topic, and it is something that I just really regret that, and I forewarned of this, but I regret we're crowding this into the last meeting of this term on very big changes Many of them very positive, but some of them with some concerning potential unintended consequences. But the process was what the process was. I did address the WMM and their particular issues that did not get past muster with the city attorney. And so we went to the broader look with the task force, looking at all of the districts, but their finding, and you can read their 67-page task force report, their finding is keep the 4 different districts and help address them individually. And so that's what we're embarking on.
Okay, it's now 9 o'clock. The last comment in the chat is from Jess, and I think it's a very good one to go out on. And that is to please remember that school starts tomorrow at Eastport Elementary and around the city. Please be patient and safe with students and families as they adjust to new schools, new schedules, and life back to school after 2.5 years.
A very good message to end it on. And can all of our kids, unfortunately not being able to be inoculated, stay safe and have safe passage to and from school. So thank you for that message, Jess. And thank you, everybody. I have to admit that the turnout was very strong. The questions were very good. I took lots of notes. This is recorded, so I can go back and look at it. But thank you all for coming. And at this point, I'll bid you adieu. Thank you.
Thank you for
Ross.